On our way to our next process station, Station 4, the students and scientists got together to talk about the cruise.
Now, from the perspective of SIMU, when we all got together last time and we decided to come to the South Pacific, there were some major ideas that came forward. One of them, from my perspective, that made it interesting is that we were moving from one of the most productive regions in the world, that is the upwelling, to one of the poorest that we know, really, where there is almost no biomass. So looking at those gradients and look at how that biomass and the microbial community changes across those gradients made it extremely interesting.
In order for the scientists to put their samples and experiments into the context of each region of the ocean that they sample, they rely heavily on a set of measurements known as the core samples. Tara Clemente and Ken Doggett from the University of Hawaii will help explain.
Along this transect, we're making core measurements to characterize the physical, chemical, and biological parameters. These core measurements are important because they help put other scientists' projects into perspective. When you take a measurement and you don't know what the physical, chemical, and biological parameters are, it's kind of hard to put your data into context. The Hawaii Ocean Time Series, for instance, has been taking core measurements of the North Pacific Gyre for 23 years now, and we're implementing their procedures and protocols in our core measurements here down in the South Pacific Gyre. And this will make for a good comparison to compare both different regimes. Right now I'm measuring particulate carbon and nitrogen, and this is one of the core parameters. We're also measuring particulate silica, particulate phosphorus, along with some of the dissolved nutrients like nitrate, nitrite, phosphorus, and silicate. And we're also doing some oxygen samples, some flow cytometry, and DIC. So we've got a big suite of measurements that are hopefully going to help us characterize the water column and put our data into a big picture.
Earlier you were introduced to our CTD rosette, which is our primary sampling package for oceanographic cruises. CTD, as you remember, stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth. Those are three of the sensors we have on board. Additionally, we have an oxygen sensor and a fluorescence sensor. Fluorescence gives us a measurement of the chlorophyll in the water, and the oxygen tells us how much oxygen is in the water. And it turns out both these sensors can tend to drift a little bit over time, and we need to make some measurements to ensure that they're accurate. Right here you see our oxygen titrator. So as part of the core measurements, I take oxygen samples. So these are water samples taken from specific depths. Right here I'm measuring a 300-meter sample for its oxygen content. And this instrument will measure the oxygen very accurately and very precisely. And I can use this to compare to my CTD trace, the oxygen trace, and see if there's any offset. And if there's an offset, I can adjust it so that they're reading the same. Also measured during the cruise are the nutrient samples. Joe Jennings from Oregon State University is on board to make these measurements.
This instrument is what we use to analyze what we call the inorganic nutrients in the seawater, and these are the fundamental building blocks of all organic material. So in this case, of course, there's carbon, there's hydrogen, oxygen. Those all come from the water. Here we're looking at the nitrogen and phosphorus that are fundamental to all living organisms. It's just like what a gardener would be putting out to get your tomatoes to grow. You'd add nitrate, you'd add phosphate. That's exactly what we're measuring here to see what's present in the seawater, what's available to the phytoplankton and microbial community. And these serve as a backdrop against which the scientists are conducting their experiments, and a lot of the experiments involve then changing the amounts of nutrients available to see how the phytoplankton and the microbes respond to that.
All of the remaining core samples taken during the cruise are analyzed back on land. Stay tuned for Station 4 updates.